Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first edition of And the Award Goes To. I am your host, normally known as the Dirt Sheet Kaden over on the UPR Wrestling channel, but for this series, I'll go by Oscarbait Kaden. Before we get into the first movie that I am reviewing, which of course, as you can tell by the title, is Nomadland, let's talk a little bit about what this series is going to be. So as you can guess by the name And the Award Goes To and the film that I'm reviewing today, this is going to be about Oscar movies. Academy movies, Oscar bait, award bait, whatever you like to call them, that's what these are going to be about. Each week, I will review a different Oscar movie that has been nominated in the past few years. I'll give my thoughts on the movie, discuss what these movies were nominated for, i.e. Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Director, Best Screenplay, and I will talk about if they should have won, if they were snubbed for any awards, and give my overall thoughts on those. Now that that's out of the way, let's talk about Nomadland. So Nomadland is the 2021 Academy Awards Best Picture winner. It also took home Best Director and Best Actress for Chloe Zhao and Frances McDormand, respectively. Nomadland follows a woman in her 60s who, after losing everything in the Great Recession, embarks on a journey through the American West, living as a van-dwelling modern-day nomad. It carries a 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it is a critically acclaimed film that was released on Hulu streaming on February 19th, 2021, and also was released in limited theaters in order to qualify for the Oscars this year. This, of course, as I said, had Chloe Zhao winning Best Director, Frances McDormand winning Best Actress, and Best Picture at the Oscars, the big prize. We'll talk about those awards a little later on, but it definitely makes it a very popular, a very critically acclaimed film that released in 2021 and late 2020. I don't know when it exactly released in mid-theater or in the limited theaters in order to qualify for the Oscars. This year was a little bit different. Usually they have to release by, I believe, December 20th. I would guess this year it was by the beginning of March. I don't really know, but sometimes it happens. Let's get into this film. So something I need to point out real quickly before kind of breaking down everything about this movie is that this was using real actual nomads. Chloe Zhao, instead of finding some actors to play these roles, she decided that she wanted actual nomads to talk about who they are. Of course, it's exaggerated because it's a film, but I believe that adds, in my opinion, it adds a very solid extra layer, and it adds to the film in itself. It makes it better, in my opinion. It just gives you a whole nother respect towards what all of these people did, how the writing was able to handle these real life people, and how the director herself was able to direct these people and get these really good performances out of non-actors. So we'll go a little bit through the movie. We'll follow it chronologically. The movie begins with a few sentences that kind of describe what's happening. We learn that there's a shutdown of I believe it was a sheetrock facility in Empire, Nevada. Following that, the city had its zip code shut off, and all of these people were now displaced in the world. We're following the character of Fern, her story. We see her moving she packs up a van, grabs some stuff out of a storage unit, and goes to an Amazon facility. I would guess somewhere in Nevada. We don't really know. This was in December, the winter. It's coming up on New Year's. And that's her first stop. When she's there, she meets a character named Linda May. And Linda May tells her about some nomads that are going to gather in the middle of nowhere in the desert in Arizona. She decides to follow them to there in the desert, hangs out with those nomads, and decides to become a nomad herself. Before, she was probably going to be leaning that way anyways, but this kind of solidified that this was the lifestyle for her at this point in her life. So she goes to this place with all the nomads, and there's eventually only two left, her and Swanky. Swanky is an old lady that, and I mean, this was fantastic. The story with Swanky, this is a real nomad. She was at the Oscars walking the red carpet, and she gave an incredible performance. What we learn about Swanky is that she was, I believe, diagnosed with cancer. I don't remember what they exactly said she was diagnosed with, but after she had that diagnosis, she decided that she wanted to travel and could not be under one place anymore. They talk a little bit more about just kind of everything with her, what she was doing. It's very powerful. That's what you learn about the nomads. There's a scene in the fireplace where they're all talking about their story, and they each tell these these compelling stories that I don't know if they were real or not, but considering that these are real nomads, I would guess they were telling their true life story, which I find to be very intriguing. So we learn about a little, as I mentioned earlier, we learn about Swinky a lot here, and she wants to find these birds. And this is wrapped up a little later. This is a thread that's sewn in throughout that we find out when she sends a video to Fern of those birds. That's how we find out that she actually did find them. And then as the year comes around and they go back to this big meeting of the nomads at the beginning of the year, a year later, they find out that Swinky had unfortunately passed away, and they all throw rocks into the fireplace because she loved rocks. So I found that to be probably the best story thread throughout the movie. It was one of the only threads. There's not many. As I'll mention a little later, this is not a story-based movie. This is a character-based movie. And this was one of the best story arcs that they kind of told and kept coming back to. And this was the most emotional part of the movie, in my opinion. And yeah. So now moving on to another story thread that's kind of told throughout. It's the story of Fern and Gay. So Gay is a man that she meets at the original gathering of the nomads, that first one that she attends. And he gives her what I believe was a can opener. And they keep meeting as she's traveling from place to place, working these different jobs a week or two at a time, and then moving somewhere else. They just keep running into each other. At one point, they're in what they reference as the Badlands. I don't know exactly where that is, but he's working there as a tour guide for a little bit while she's working at one of the campsites, and he's actually staying at that campsite. So then they hang out a lot there. They move again, and they work at a restaurant. And then eventually we find out that Gay, his son, has a child. So he decides to move back in with his family and be a grandfather. As we're doing that, little later on, to come back to that story of him finally settling down, Fern goes to visit him. And while she's there, he tells her that he wants her to move in with her. Something interesting about this, and this is the biggest overall thread of the story, is that you're learning about Fern's character. And in that scene, we learn, there's two scenes like this where we truly learn this, but she cannot live under a roof. She cannot be in a bed. Halfway through the night, she moves out of the bed that she was in and goes and sleeps in her van. For some reason, she has this trauma where she can no longer sleep under a roof in a bed. And we find that out again later. I believe this might have actually been before. I don't remember exactly where this comes in. But when she goes to visit her sister after her van breaks down and she needs some money, her sister says, please move in with me. And she again says, I cannot. I simply cannot be under this roof. Some of the motivation is revealed here, where her sister mentions that she's always wanted to leave. She left home as soon as she could. She stayed in Empire, Nevada after her husband had passed away much longer than she needed to, but she still stayed away. And that kind of reveals something about Fern, that she always wants to travel. She doesn't like being in a specific place too long. But I also think when we learn this about her husband, and we see at the end of the movie, we come to this. She goes back to Empire, and she goes to their old house. And I think that revealed the biggest part about this, was that this is her having to come to terms with her husband passing away. And that's why she cannot stay. She's coming to terms with her husband passing away. And that's why she can't stay in a house. She had a house with him. And now that he's gone, and now she still had Empire to remember him. And then once Empire got shut down as a city, and once the facility was gone, she had really nothing. And she could not live with still being under a house. She needed to go do something else and be out there farther in the world. Now, coming back to the storyline with Gay, this is a very interesting storyline as well, because it tells you that these nomads, they might have this sexual tension with one another, but they have to keep moving. So while they can move together, there's really no way for them to be in a relationship, because you would then have to realistically settle down. You could continuously move together, but that does not really follow the lifestyle. You're supposed to always be going for one specific thing, continuously moving and continuously going through life. So that shows that even though two people do have a connection between Fern and Gay, they can neither of them can settle down correctly. While Gay was able to do that with his grandchildren, Fern still could not. And I just find that interesting, and it gives you a good peek into the life of the nomads. And that's what this movie is. This movie is a character story. It's a character profile, right? It's telling a story about these characters, about these nomads, explaining how they live in the world, giving you a peek into their mindsets. And that's why this movie is so good. It does something different that I have not seen done in a movie. I love a good story in a movie. I love a good plot. I love the climax. That's not this movie. It tells a very compelling story about people. And that's why this is so good. Frances McDormand, as we're going to talk about this in a minute, delivers a fantastic performance. The writing is great. The directing is fantastic. The acting from these non-actors is so good. Everything about this movie hits the mark. It does, I will admittedly say, it starts a little weird. You're going to probably be confused for the good first 15 to 20 minutes. But that's because people aren't used to having this type of story. We're always told that we're going to follow a story. And when you don't follow a story, it takes a little bit of adjustment, which it did for me. It took me about 20 to 25 minutes to really get into this. I was kind of bored for the first 20 minutes. And once I got to that 30-minute point where I realized what was happening, I got deep into this movie. I was going to say my whole plan for watching this last night was I was going to watch half and half. That way I wouldn't be tired. And about halfway through the movie, I realized I could no longer turn this off because of how invested I was in these characters and in the story as a whole. This is a fantastic movie. I recommend everybody should watch this. It might not be everybody's cup of tea. I can understand that based on how different it is. It just might not be for you. But this movie is incredible. Everything in it landed on the spot. But let's get into these awards. So Frances McDormand, of course, as I mentioned, took home Best Actress at the Oscars. And this will be a common thread throughout the first few movies I do. I have not watched every Oscar movie this year. I think I've watched maybe 2 that were nominated for Best Picture. I know I've watched this one. I believe Trial of the Chicago 7 was nominated, and I've seen that. But basing it off of the performance here by her, what I watched in this film last night, she delivered on every cylinder, every base, firing. I'm going to redo that. Basing this on me watching this last night, she fired on all cylinders in this film. She delivered a realistic performance that made me buy into her character, buy into her story, who she was. And considering that I did not know at the time that these were all real nomads, and it would not have surprised me to learn that she was also a nomad. And that's not because her acting was bad. It's because all of the acting was fantastic, and she was so believable and made me buy into what she was doing. I've never been that bought into a film. Her look, she looked the role here. She acted the role. Every little thing she did felt like she had bought into herself in this role. Now, let's talk about Chloe Zhao winning Best Director. 100% deserved. She directed all of these nomads to give their best, probably the best performances they're ever going to give, considering it's the only performance they're probably going to have in an Oscar movie, unless there's a documentary made. But they gave fantastic performances out of non-actors. They gave better performances than highly trained year-round actors that have studied their whole lives to be actors. They were fantastic, and that's because of Chloe Zhao's vision. Her vision is also done, you can see it throughout the movie, the shots that she decided to go with, every little thing about what Chloe Zhao did and chose to direct in this film was fantastic. And if she brings that same caliber of directing to Marvel's The Eternals, which releases in this November, I think we could be looking at another Marvel movie being nominated for Best Picture and possibly taking home the award, which would be amazing. Let's get into the big one. It's Best Picture, the last award that they won at the Oscars in 2021 last week. I cannot right now say that I would say it won Best Picture because I have not seen the others. And I will admit, I think I like Trial of the Chicago 7 a little bit more than this. But when you're talking about Best Picture, you weigh a lot of different things. The impact the movie had, the circumstances of the film, everything goes into account here. That's why I would give this the award based off of what I've seen right now, comparing it to the other movies like a Minari, Mank, all of those, I would give Nomadland the award. The circumstances, which I've talked about 30 times already, is that these were real nomads. The circumstances of that they were, looks like they were on location for most of the movie. It is a Best Picture movie. It deserved to win Best Picture. I don't know if anything else could have beaten it out this year based off of everything else. I just don't think any movie can rival this film in terms of what it did, its circumstances, and its impact, what it was able to do. Combining that with Chloe Zhao becoming the first woman of color to ever win Best Director, I think that does also have a play into this. Best Director usually does have a play into the Best Picture. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. I think this time it was. And that's why, sorry, I'm going to redo that. Best Picture usually has a play with Best Director. Sometimes they like to combine them. Other times they'll say, no, we don't want to give them Best Picture and Best Picture. Gotta redo that again. A lot of the times, Best Picture and Best Director will go hand in hand, and I think that's what they did here. They went hand in hand because the directing was everything here. Well, the acting was fantastic. I think the directing is what made this a very good story, and I think it being so different from what I have seen recently in film also made it stand out among the rest, since it did not really, it told a story, but it told a story through the development of characters. And my favorite parts of movies, if you guys have watched my Falcon and Winter Soldier and WandaVision reviews, you'll know I love the character development. It's that's my favorite part about those series, is what they do to develop those characters. And this was literally just a film about character development, which is why I love this film. It deserved to take home Best Picture. It was fantastic. Thank you for joining me on the inaugural episode of And the Award Goes To. I've been your host, Oscarbait Kaden. Make sure to join me every week as we review these different Oscarbait movies. Next week, I will be reviewing The Trial of the Chicago 7, my personal favorite movie so far that was released in 2020. So tune into that. If you guys have any Oscarbait movies you'd like me to review, drop those in the comments and I'll make sure I get to them. Thank you for joining me, and goodbye.